Hi everyone. Today is the first lesson in our weekly series of modern Indian history. We are going to begin with the arrival of Europeans. For a concise and effective learning process, we are going to approach this in parts. We will first learn of the active players, then the years of their arrival, their locations of power, and the journey from their rise to their fall. Now, we are not going to discuss the arrival of English here, but the story of how the British colony started in a separate video altogether. Here, we are going to discuss about the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, and a little bit about the Danes. So, let us begin. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Arabs had gained control of Egypt and Persia, and they had also taken over the land routes to India. As a result, Europe was losing out on goods such as spices, silk, etc. from India, and they had to buy them at huge profit margins from the Arabs. Now, at the same time, the Europeans had made considerable advancement in shipbuilding and navigation. So now they set out to find a sea route to India. The first to arrive were the Portuguese. However, there were many players on the board. So first, let us look at who all were the Europeans who travelled to India. The four main players were the Portuguese, the Dutch, the English, and the French. Now let us look at the timeline. The Portuguese arrived in 1498 under Vasco da Gama. The Dutch arrived in 1605. The English arrived right after in 1609, led by Captain Hawkins. And finally, the French arrived in 1667. Now, many a times in exams we are required to answer the order in which the European nations came to India. So remember the order, it's PDEF, that is Portuguese followed by the Dutch followed by the English and then the French. So now let us look at the locations each of them set up factories at and when, while trying to understand the events that happened during the time that they spent in India. We begin with the Portuguese. Now the Portuguese arrived with Vasco da Gama looking to set up a trade monopoly. They landed in Calicut in 1498 and in 1501 the Zamorin ruler of Calicut refused to exclude the Arabs in trade. But since the Portuguese were looking for a monopoly, Vasco da Gama wreaked havoc on Arab traders. Now having lost favour with the Zamorin, he set up a factory at Cananore. In 1505, Francisco de Almeida was appointed governor in India for a 3-year term. Now he was expected to squash the Arab trade, which he did manage to do in 1508. After being defeated at sea by the combined might of the Egyptian Gujarati navies in 1507, he took revenge in 1508 and quashed the Arab trade. Then came Alfonso de Albuquerque. Now he introduced a permit system for ships and held strong control over shipbuilding centers. In 1510, he acquired Goa from the Sultan of Bijapur, which became the first bit of Indian territory under Europeans since Alexander the Great. An interesting feature of his rule was the abolition of sati. The Portuguese began growing cashew, tobacco, coconut, etc. in the northern province and Goa, and they became master artisans in Goa and Cochin cities as well. In November 1529, Nino da Canha took over, moving the Portuguese headquarters from Kochi to Goa. He helped Bahadur Shah of Gujarat in his conflict with Humayun, but when Humayun retreated, they fell out. This led to the Portuguese inviting Bahadur Shah to the ships for negotiations and then murdering him. It was during this time that Hooghly in Bengal became a Portuguese hub. So what allowed the Portuguese to create their stronghold? Northern India was divided and there wasn't a strong central power to stop them. Even in the Deccan, the Brahmani kingdom was falling apart. None of the kingdoms in India had a strong navy and the Portuguese were defeating everyone there. Now the Chinese couldn't reach India because by imperial restrictions set by their emperor, they could not come beyond a certain distance from their location. Now, Arab merchants who dominated Indian trade were no match for the organizational skills of the Portuguese. So all of this helped the Portuguese set up their monopoly in India. But why did they fall? There were a number of reasons for the fall of the Portuguese. The Portuguese fell out with the Mughals during Shah Jahan's reign. This greatly affected their control over their Indian territories. They lost favor due to their ruthless piracy practices. Hooghly became their piracy and slavery bay, where they were seizing Hindu and Muslim children and selling them, which soon led to a battle with the Mughals. Their religious overtures, especially by the Jesuits, were seen as a threat by the Islamic rulers as well as the Hindu rulers. The Maratha hostility cost them dearly. The discovery of Brazil and their union with Spain also diverted their colonial interests, and so they went putting their whole interest in India. And soon after, the Dutch and the English had learnt of the sea route to India. As a result, the Portuguese could not hold on to their monopoly anyway. Now, the Portuguese could not compete with the vast resources of their competitors, such as the English, and finally they have to give in. Next, we come to the Dutch. Now, on arriving in India, the Dutch founded their first factory in Masulipatam in 1605, and soon they became a threat to the Portuguese. They captured Nagapatnam near Madras and made it their stronghold. They even followed it by settling a string of factories in Surat in 1616, Bimlipatam in 1641, Karaikal in 1645, Chinsura in 1653, Baranagar, Kasim Bazar, Balasore, Patna and Nagapatnam in 1658 and Kochi in 1663. They traded indigo from Yamuna Valley and textiles and silk from Bengal, Gujarat and Coromandel. They even traded saltpeter from Bihar and opium and rice from the Ganga valleys. Now, why did the Dutch decline? Their rivalry with the British was a major factor in their downfall. Soon they got drawn into trade from the Malay archipelago. In November 1759, in a crushing blow, the English defeated the Dutch. As they were not interested in empire building but trade, the Dutch turned their attention to the Spice Islands of Indonesia and simply left. Now we come to the French. The French started off in 1667 by setting up a factory in Surat, followed by one in Masulipatam, and in 1673 they obtained permission from the Subedar of Bengal to set up a township at Chandirnagar. Now Pondicherry settlement was established soon after in 1674, and this was followed by Mahe, Karaikal, Balasore and Kasim Bazar. An interesting aspect of the French colony was its constant rivalry with the British, which led to the Carnatic Wars. Now, Carnatic was the name given by the Europeans to the Coromandel coast and its hinterlands. Traditionally, England and France have shared rivalry throughout history. In India, in both their attempts to establish political power, and the downfall of the French was a result of it. The First Carnatic War. The English seized some French ships and the French retaliated by seizing Madras. The war ended with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. Under the terms, Madras was handed back to English and the French got back their territories in North America. Now the war was fought between the French and the Nawab of Carnatic, to whom English had appealed for help. This was an eye-opener for Europeans in India, showing them a small disciplined army can win over a much larger Indian army as the French did. And this brought the importance of naval forces to everyone's notice. And the French had won this war. Next, the Second Carnatic War. The war began with dispute over who had claims to the Nizam throne of Hyderabad as well as the Carnatic throne. Now, the French supported the claims of Muzaffar Jung and Chand Sahib in Deccan and Carnatic respectively, whereas the English supported Nasir Jung and Anwaruddin. In August 1751, with the aid of Robert Clive and his army of just 210 men, and gradually with the support of Mysore state, Tanjore and Maratha towards the English, the French Governor-General Duplessis and his French forces were forced to surrender in June 1752. Now the result was removal of Duplessis as Governor-General and he was succeeded by Godieu. Both the English and the French agreed not to interfere in the matters of the native states any further. And it was during this war that the Europeans realized that they do not need help from the native kingdoms to succeed. In fact, it's rather that the native kingdoms had become dependent on them. And finally, the Third Carnatic War. Now, the French captured English forts at St. David and Vizianagaram in 1758. The English fleet suffered heavy losses in Masulipatam. Now, in the decisive Battle of Wandiwash on January 22, 1760, the English under General Eyre Coote defeated the French, thereby consolidating their political power over India. Wandiwash is in Tamil Nadu, by the way. And after this war, although the Treaty of Peace of Paris was signed in 1763, returning the French their factories in India, their political power disappeared completely soon after, much like the Portuguese and the Dutch counterparts, making the English the supreme European power in the Indian subcontinent. Although Battle of Plassey in 1757 is actually regarded as the point of English victory over India, we cannot ignore the significance of the Battle of Wandiwash as one of the more important points in history where the English consolidated their power over India. And also, there were the Danes who deserve a mention here. In 1620, the Danish set up a factory in Tranquebar. Their principal settlement was in Serampore near Calcutta. In 1845, the Danish factories were sold to the British government, and in fact, they are better known as missionaries than their activities of commerce. So, this part is not that important. You just need to remember the two places which are Tranquebar and Serampore, where they set up factories, and they arrived in 1620, which is after the English but before the French. So the sequence becomes Portuguese, followed by Dutch, followed by English, followed by Danish, followed by the French. So that's all for today's video. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. there will be a live test on the material covered through this video. If you want to learn more on this, you can visit the links in the description below. And until next time, goodbye and good luck.